What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk Podcast. Chris, we are back to a winning streak. Another one to talk about. The Cavs improved to 17-1 in their win over the Toronto Raptors on Sunday night. Chris, it's been a whirlwind of a season just to start. We've gotten to see a lot of different games being won in a lot of different ways. This is the second time that the Cavs played the Toronto Raptors. It was a much different game than they played against them in their first game of the season. Obviously, RJ Barrett was back. That poses problems already. What did you think about how the Cavs attacked this game in a different mindset than they might have had when it came to the season opener?
Do these games count? Games against the Raptors, games against the Pelicans, would-be G-Leaguers. You know what I mean? I think we've gotten to a point where it comes to the Cavs and they've elevated themselves to a standard where we almost have to nitpick some of the things that they're doing well, but not as well as they would like to do them. They trailed for 18 seconds. 18 seconds. One basket. RJ Barrett made a floater to start the game. It was 2-0 Raptors. That was their only lead of the game. They led for 18 seconds. And the Cavs, after the game, were talking about all these different things that they didn't do well throughout the course of the game. Kenny Atkinson talking about fouling too much. Donovan Mitchell saying our defense can't have the same kind of slippage, especially in the third quarter. Jared Allen talking about we've got to put these teams away better when we have the chance. Like, if there's anything that stands out to me, it's that, Ethan. This is a bad Raptors team. They've won 4 games all season long, and the Cavs had to play the majority of their regulars deep into this game, even though they had a 16-point lead at the end of the first quarter. Like, in these kinds of games, you would prefer that the Cavs take care of business, don't have slippage, don't have let-ups, and don't let it get to a point where it's a 2-possession game going into the fourth quarter, and you really have to fight and play these guys extra minutes and stuff like that. But other than that, I mean, I think it's really, really hard to gauge good, bad, indifferent when it comes to the Cavs playing against the Raptors, because part of the way that you play, part of how you look, part of the success you have is dictated by your opponent, and the Raptors do not belong on the same floor as the Cavs. Not in this state, anyway.
Yeah, or this
or in
country.
Any state, really, if we're being honest. Yeah, or in any country.
That's what I'm saying, right? They played the national anthem for Canada early to start the game. That was interesting. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Chris. Like, this is a team that has surpassed a lot of the different teams across the NBA, and especially in the Eastern Conference, which we know has struggled to start the season. And for me, Chris, when you look around and you look at the schedule and you look at how the Cavs have, quote unquote, the easiest schedule in the NBA to this point when it comes to playing against teams that are not playing to their caliber, right? That also does include the New York Knicks, who until a couple days ago, I believe, didn't have a winning record, right? And then the Philadelphia 76ers, who have played horribly, but also are a team that you want to look for in the play-in tournament now. Then you talk about other teams as well, like the Milwaukee Bucks, who had to figure themselves out and are trying to figure things out now. So for me, I don't want to talk more about like each matchup, because I feel like the Cavs have taken it game by game and have found a different way to win each time. But Chris, there has been a little bit of a continuance with this team, and it's how they've spread the offense out. And I know we want to talk about defense a lot for this game in particular, but I want to start with the offense because there's been a stretch of games, I believe it's 3 now, where the Cavs have scored with 6 different players in double figures. And that is nothing to sneeze at, right? Being able to facilitate and being able to have multiple guys score to that caliber is something that the Cavs have not been able to do in recent history. So to be able to to be able to improve the offense to this substantialness, it means how much this team has not only worked in Kenny Atkinson's system, but how much this team can continue to lean on that even while trying to prioritize improving their defense that was once their defensive identity.
And the thing that stands out during this stretch to me, Ethan, is that some of those games have been without Karis LeVert. Karis LeVert's still dealing with a sore knee. Karis LeVert still hasn't been able to practice much, hasn't been able to do much in terms of workouts on the floor because everything is about maintenance on his knee and managing the soreness in his knee and trying to get it back. I talked to a source earlier tonight that said they're just being cautious with it. There's no need to push it. This is the value of the Cavs having depth. This is the value of having different guys like you talked about, Ethan, stepping up and delivering and taking advantage of opportunities. The other night against New Orleans, it was Jalen Tyson and Craig Porter Jr. Other nights throughout the course of the season, it's been George Niang. Tonight, Isaac Okoro reached double figures for this team. And he returned to the lineup, and he provided quality, consistent minutes at both ends of the floor, too, for Isaac, which was really good to see from the Cavs' perspective. So, yeah, it's a strength of this team for sure. Kenny Atkinson has talked about it. And for the season, they've got 6 players averaging in double figures. And the less predictable that you can be on offense with your attack and who's going to have the ball, who's going to initiate, who's going to finish, the more dangerous it's going to make when these defenses are trying to come up with schemes to try and slow teams down, especially the Cavs. That's the one consistent thing when it comes to this team, Ethan. From opening night until now, there just hasn't been an opponent, whether it was the Warriors, whether it was the Bucks, whether it was the Boston Celtics, whether it was the New York Knicks, whoever you want to throw out there. There has not been an opponent that has consistently been able to stymie this Cavs offense and limit this Cavs offense. And I think part of the reason for that is because they have multiple guys that can hurt you on the offensive end because multiple guys touch it throughout the course of a possession because it's just not a predictable offense. It's based on reads. It's based on cuts. It's based on all these different principles that the Cavs have instilled. And before the game, here's the scary part for the rest of the NBA. Before the game, Kenny Atkinson said he's got about 70% of the offense installed at this point in time. And that makes sense because 1, he's a new coach. 2, the Cavs are missing a key piece of their expected starting lineup at Max Strus. But 3, I mean, this has been a grueling, taxing, condensed schedule that has limited the amount of times that the Cavs have been able to practice in the first month of the season. It has affected how many times they do shoot around, whether it's at home or on the road. All of these different things that make this schedule difficult, not the opponent, but just the difficultness of the schedule in terms of travel, in terms of every other day, in terms of back-to-backs and stuff like that. It's really impacted the amount of things that the Cavs can do behind the scenes in terms of installing a lot of the stuff that they're hoping to install by the end of the season. So the Cavs are operating at this level offensively without, a full arsenal in terms of sets, in terms of play calls, and without a full roster. So there hasn't been a team that has been able to find a consistent answer for how to slow down what has become an offensive juggernaut.
And Chris, you mentioned offensive sets, right? And we talked to Kenny Atkinson ahead of the game, and like you said, he was talking about getting to practice for the first time since like the beginning of the season, and how they weren't necessarily working on their pet sets or the things that they know that they can go to, but more so focusing on what happens if those don't work, right? Yeah. Because obviously defenses and opposing coaches are as smart as they are and can play to that caliber. This is the NBA, but so they're going to try and blow those plays up. The pet sets, the pick and rolls, all those different things that Donovan Mitchell, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, that they go to, right? So being able to understand where you're going to be, what you're going to do when things go wrong, when things are not accounted for. And I think that's part of why this team has been so great, because they don't react to what is going well. They react to what goes wrong. And we saw it in Milwaukee when Donovan Mitchell had the kind of mental time clock in his head when the ball got loose from his hands and he went to go get it near the sideline and then came back and still had time and the mindset to go get his own bucket in that game winner that he hit in Milwaukee. So obviously there haven't been a lot of times where the Cavs have been in those sets where they've had to go to something that they set up and orchestrate and all those different things, because they've had leads going into the fourth quarter and throughout those fourth quarters. But for them to have those and understand what to do in those different scenarios, I feel like it's big to me. And we talked also about Kenny Atkinson being able to do things differently off the ball with Donovan Mitchell and all these different things. It feels like, and you mentioned it, that 70%, which is insane to think about already 18 games into the season, like what is capable of this team and where they can improve. Because like we've talked about all season, Chris, this team never seems satisfied.
Yeah, I mean, there's a standard that they're trying to uphold on a daily basis, and they understand championship habits and the importance of building those throughout the course of the regular season. They understand what it means to be this caliber opponent for another team, and to be the hunted. Like, they have embraced that. I don't know if they have a full understanding of it necessarily, because it's still a new concept to them, and it's still a new role that they're thrust in. But I think they're starting to understand that, hey, we're going to be the hunted, so a different level of play is going to be required against some of these teams, even the lesser opponents that we're playing against. I just think it's incredible to think about the fact that their worst offensive rating so far this year is 112.2. It's a different level of offense that the Cavs have reached here, and they want to continue that. They want to continue to have that kind of standard and those kinds of expectations. And I think the mark of a great team is one that understands, we do still have a ways to go. We can still hold each other accountable, even when we're winning games, even when we're doing things right. There isn't a level of satisfaction of, okay, we're 17-1, we've got the best offense in the NBA. It's, okay, what's the next step for us? What other things can we focus on? Where are areas where we can improve? There just hasn't been this feeling around the team of overall excitement or overall shock at the way that they're playing. Look, everybody inside the organization, Ethan, is surprised by 17-1. Obviously, that's a mark that not many teams throughout the course of NBA history have hit. So you're not going to sit there and say, oh yeah, we expected this. But like the level of play that they've gotten to, the style that they're showing at both ends of the floor for a majority of this season, that's the thing that stands out to them. And it's hard to say that that's not a surprise, but I think the Cavs would say it's not a surprise that they've played to a high level where they're a legitimate championship contender, because that's what they saw themselves as coming into the season. That's what they believed was possible with this new coaching change, with this new system, in this new offense. But I like the fact that even when they win by double digits, they're finding different things that they can try and fix and they can try and focus on, because all of that stuff will matter when you get to April, May, and June.
And Chris, one of the major things that they continue to talk about wanting to improve is their defense. And obviously they are still in the top 10 in defensive rating. They're number 9. And they have, and like you said, they're 17-1. So they've done good enough to beat 17 teams over 18 games. And they are just the 9th team in NBA history to do that. So good on them already, right? But we talk about this non-complacency that they have hammered home. Right, it takes me back to Tristan Thompson's halftime speech in a game where he was like, "Hey, like if we have the opportunity to bury these teams, we need to do
Yeah.
that." Then talking about Kenny Atkinson throwing a flip flop at halftime because they let up 73 points. Like those are the different things when we talk about this team does not want to be like lackluster on the defensive end because they know they have been. And we talk about this all the time, Chris. They have the same personnel that they had when they were one of the top defenses in the league. So what's changed? What's different? And the league continues to grow. And we can also talk about the 3-point percentage that they've allowed, which is different and is something that has to do with luck, but it also has to do with defensive adjustments, right? So we talk about the two areas in the last two games that we've seen that have needed the most adjustments, and it's because they face two very different kinds of teams. The Boston Celtics, they had a more 5-out, spread-out lineup than the Toronto Raptors, right? So the Cavs were forced to overhelp, it felt like, and that allowed for the Celtics to get more open looks on the perimeter. Now then you turn to the Toronto Raptors game, and they felt like they were fouling too much, over fouling when it comes to the players that are known for driving to the basket. Two different areas, two different teams, and it's going to be difficult for this team to try and mediate both of them because you have to adhere to whichever team you're playing. The next game, you might have to go against a team that shoots a lot from three. Some teams are going to be more perimeter, more interior based. Chris, how do you think this Cavs team, or where do you think this Cavs team can grow when it comes to not only defense, but fixing both aspects against different opponents?
So going back to everything that we talked about throughout the course of this podcast, this was one of their better defensive games. It was one of their better defensive performances against Toronto. And look, it was against Toronto. And I think everybody understands the weaknesses that the Raptors have, especially in this state. They didn't have Emmanuel Quickley. They didn't have Kelly Olynyk. RJ Barrett was in clamps by Isaac Okoro for majority of the game. Scottie Barnes was not very good. So, yes, you have to keep it in perspective that it was against Toronto, and two of the Cavs' best performances defensively have come against the Raptors. That's not a coincidence. In saying that, it was one of their best defensive performances of the season, despite the fact that they gave up 19 offensive rebounds. 19 offensive rebounds. They still held the Raptors to 108. They still held the Raptors to an offensive rating right around 105, which is not good in today's NBA. It is a disaster in today's NBA. So I think they did some positive things on the defensive end of the floor. The energy was better. I thought the closeouts were a little bit better. I thought the physicality was a little bit better. And look, Kenny Atkinson, as the coach of the team, he's going to find different things that he doesn't like. And Donovan Mitchell is one of the leaders of the team. He's going to find things that he doesn't like. And he was talking about the fouling, and he was talking about grabbing, and he was talking about the Cavs being one of the teams that is among the league leaders in committing fouls on drives. So trying to negate the drives of the opponent, that's obviously a point of emphasis. But if you're asking me, I think it's a lot easier to start off as a physical, in-your-face team that grabs and holds a little bit and try and minimize the amount of times of that, as opposed to trying to get a team to be really, really competitive at the point of attack. So, yeah, it led to a bunch of fouls for the Cavs tonight and a bunch of free throws for the Raptors, but they need to be a physical defense. That's who they are. That's who they want to be. Evan Mobley, Jared Allen protecting the rim, Isaac Okoro being really handsy and physical at the point of attack. Dean Wade, when healthy, he's that kind of defender as well, who's probably going to get called for a few fouls, but his physicality is also going to bother players at times. So I do think there's a line. I do think there's a balance, and the Cavs are trying to find the right balance. But it's hard for me, aside from not finishing the defensive possession tonight with the rebound, it's hard for me to find too much fault in their defensive performance tonight. I thought that was more representative against the Raptors of who the Cavs are and who the Cavs ultimately want to be and who the Cavs need to be on the defensive end of the floor. Now they just have to continue to play at that kind of defensive level and make it so that this is a positive trend and it's an upward trajectory. And the whole 10-game stretch where they were, close to the bottom 10 in defense is a thing in the past, and that's behind them.
And to use a word from Ty Jerome, some of them weren't miscues or whatever. They might have just been dumb plays. And those aren't my words. Those are Ty Jerome's words, right? Because we talked about the same thing with him after the game about how the defense was decent, but if they limit the fouling, this is a completely different game. And to be fair to the Toronto Raptors, it should have been an even worse outcome for the Cavs if they would have hit their free throws. The Toronto Raptors went to the free throw line, the charity stripe, 34 times compared to the Cavs' 14. Toronto hit 22. They shot 64.7% or 65% rounded up at the free throw line. That's horrible as a team, right? Like, that's not where you want to be at in those comparisons. But speaking of Ty Jerome, right? We talked about the 6 different players that scored in double figures. I want to also touch on the fact that there have been, in the first 17 games, there was a different leading scorer for the Cavs in all of those games. Technically, if you want to say tonight Donovan Mitchell was the leading scorer, that can continue. But technically as well, Ty Jerome tied him, and he had the most points in their last game with 29. So that kind of ends the streak there. But, Chris, I know we talk a lot about what Ty Jerome has done on the offensive end, and he's grown as a scorer. Kenny Atkinson has said how he didn't think this was going to be a thing for Ty Jerome, right? He was like, he is a pass first guy. And to begin the season, that's what he was. That's what the game called for. You have Donovan, Darius going off, all these different things. You are facilitating and accruing like 7-8 assists per game, whatever it was. He was doing that. And that's what we had come to know. And then in the last couple of games, he's gone off in the scoring department as well, right? He had 24 against the Hornets. He had 10 against Boston. He had 29 against the Pelicans. And he had 26 again tonight against Toronto. It's the first time in his NBA career with back-to-back 20-point games. But that's not even the part that I want to talk about when it comes to Ty Jerome, because we've seen it. Everybody's seen it, right? What I don't think people understand is how good he is on the ball. He had 4 steals tonight, another career high, and that's something we talked about it after the Pelicans game. He had career highs in almost every single stat category. Now you have it on the defensive end. For him, and I want to ask this plainly, Chris, because I know I'm going on for a little bit. Do you think that if Karis LeVert is sidelined for an extended period, Dean Wade's still coming back, obviously if Isaac Okoro's in there, it's going to be a different conversation, a more difficult conversation. But with how Ty has been impacting the game, because we've seen lineups like this, could Kenny Atkinson consider putting Ty Jerome in alongside Darius and Donovan, potentially in a starting lineup?
I don't know about starting. I think Kenny is really, really focused, Ethan, on trying to create a balance between his starters and his bench and trying to make sure that there's not as much skill set overlap and stuff like that. And Ty Jerome is the steady backup point guard for this team. And if you play a majority of his minutes next to Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, are you getting the most out of Ty Jerome? Are you putting him in the best position to succeed? Now, that doesn't mean that the Cavs aren't going to have stretches throughout the course of the game or throughout the course of the season where they do use that 3-guard lineup with Darius, with Donovan, with Ty Jerome. Maybe it's at the beginning of the fourth quarter. Maybe it's at the end of games. Maybe it's when you feel like you need an extra ball handler. But I think starting those guys, I just think it becomes a little bit too difficult when it comes to managing your rotations, figuring out those rotations, and trying to match skill sets and stuff. And Kenny Atkinson kind of talked about it tonight in reference to Jalen Tyson. He said, it's really important that I find the right lineups for Jalen. If I'm going to play him, if I'm going to make that commitment to our rookie, I got to put him in a position to succeed. I've got to put him with the right lineups. I got to put him with the right guys that are going to complement his particular game. And I think that goes up and down the roster. It's part of the reason why he's gone with Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley in terms of matching minutes. It's part of the reason why he's gone with Darius Garland and Jared Allen. Darius Garland, an elite pick and roll guard in the NBA. Jared Allen, an elite pick and roll center in the NBA. Together with those guys on the floor, they've become one of the league's best, most effective pick and roll duos. So I do think Kenny is looking for different opportunities with those kinds of things. And I think it's hard to say that Ty Jerome would be best utilized next to two primary ball handlers and Donovan Mitchell and Darius for all the things that we've talked about with this offense and how different it is and how unpredictable it is and how pass happy it is and how much cutting is involved and stuff like that. I just don't know that three guys like that are so ball dominant, still so ball dominant, is the best way to go to start a game, barring a specific matchup, barring unforeseen circumstances. And if Kenny is going to go to that particular trio, I think it's going to be for short bursts so that he can get one of those guys off the floor and say, okay, when it's time, I'm going to put that guy who I pulled off the floor back in the game to run the second unit, be a stabilizer for the bench group and stuff like that. And it doesn't mean that Ty's not playing as a starting caliber player. He is, but I just think his role on this team is so clearly as bring energy off the bench, bring a change of pace off the bench, bring your basketball IQ off the bench, and all those different things. But I do think there are going to be moments, and Kenny alluded to this tonight, that Ty is going to finish games because it's hard for Kenny to take him off the floor, and I think it's hard to justify taking him off the floor. And if you're trying to finish a game with your best 5-man lineup, it's hard to say that Ty Jerome's not part of that group.
100%. I have been, and I said this at the beginning of the season, right? Like, I didn't have any sample size of Ty Jerome coming into last season as a beat reporter because I came in game 3, so Ty didn't play for the entirety that I was here, right? And then you hear about MVP of September, Ty Jerome from Kobe Altman, and it was reiterated by Kenny Atkinson tonight. And then you hear about how he's been this guy from Jared Allen since last year. Like, he knew it was going to happen. It was just, are you going to be on the court with us, right? So, like, the sample size for me was so small. And I will admit, I didn't really like his jump shot all that much when I first got here. It's grown on me. It's grown on me a lot, right? Because he's hitting them janks. So you as they say, Chris, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So
doesn't matter how it looks. Does it go in or not?
Exactly.
Ask Sean Marion about that.
That's a good comparison. I like that one.
Ugliest jump shots in the world, but became a 3-and-D guy. Scored a whole lot of points in the NBA with that ugly jumper.
Man. But I want to end the podcast on this, Chris, because I don't think we can go without talking about this when it comes to this matchup between the Raptors and the Cavs, because you talked about it. Scottie Barnes was not good tonight, and especially when he was guarded by Evan Mobley. And this is a rivalry, quote-unquote, that has leaned in Evan Mobley's favor apparently since 8th grade. He talked to me about after the game and was talking about this in the locker room and saying, like, in jokes with Ty and Darius that were obviously his locker buddies. And, like, Scottie Barnes hit a 3 in the 4th quarter that he turned to his bench and, like, screamed. It was like, apparently he said, come on, Scottie. And like the lead was cut down to 14 points and there was 8 minutes left or something. And I was like, dude, I think everybody, I told this to one of the reporters that was in the media room. I was like, I think everybody kind of turned to themselves and like, look at the scoreboard. Like, what are we talking about? And I know this might seem far stretched, but when Evan Mobley has guarded Scottie Barnes, it's been 9 minutes around in 2 games. He has allowed 6 points, 21.4% from the field. He is 3 of 14. He has 2 blocks on him, and he's 0 of 4 from 3-point range. The only area where Scottie has produced is when he's giving the ball up. He has 6 assists, right? So everybody understands what Evan Mobley is on the defensive end. Everybody understands what he can do on the defensive end as well. Because when you talk about this rivalry that has gone back so long, the 2021 draft, all these other things, I don't think two players could be so different and have a problem, like one of the better comparisons when it comes to going up against each other. Like Evan Mobley is California cool, right? And Scottie Barnes is kind of this hothead. Chris, when it comes to this battle, when it comes to this rivalry, do you think that Evan goes in every time and is like, hey, this is mine to win? Because he kind of said it at the end of the game, after the game. He was like, I like always winning these matchups too.
Oh God, yeah. And people close to Evan have been pissed since Scottie won Rookie of the Year. Evan's been pissed since Scottie won Rookie of the Year. We've talked in the past, Ethan, about the teams that you hate the most, sports hate. The players that you hate the most, sports hate, are the ones that have taken something from you. And Scottie Barnes took something that Evan believes he should have had. Scottie Barnes took something that people inside the Cavs organization, Evan's teammates, Evan's coaches, the members of this front office, they all believe that Evan should have gotten Rookie of the Year. So, of course, there's always going to be more to this matchup against Toronto. Every time Evan plays against Scottie Barnes, there is going to be that element of trying to get the best out of him, trying to get the best out of Evan and give him the platform to dominate in the kind of fashion that he is capable of. And I think, when you talk about Evan, he is a little bit different than Scottie, but that's all right. Like, quiet guys have had success in the NBA. Loud guys have had success in the NBA. The other thing that becomes pretty difficult, though, when it comes to, like, gauging this matchup head-to-head is they aren't the same kind of player, right? So even though they were drafted one pick apart, and even though Scottie was the Rookie of the Year, the year that Evan thought he should have been Rookie of the Year, and even though Scottie made an All-Star game before Evan did, it's a little bit different because, like, they're not the same kind of player. So you're not necessarily comparing apples to apples. The box score listed Scottie Barnes as a guard tonight. Like, no box score in NBA history will ever list Evan Mobley as a guard. They're different players. They have different demeanors. They have different skill sets and all that kind of stuff. But they're always going to be linked together. And these matchups between the Cavs and the Raptors, for as long as Scottie Barnes plays for Toronto and as long as Evan plays for Cleveland, there's always going to be more juice. There's always going to be guys in that Cavs locker room that are talking about it, that are trying to support Evan and have his back and make things as difficult as possible on Scottie Barnes, not just because that's a good pathway to success playing against the Raptors. Like, the two main guys that the Cavs were focused on coming into this game were obviously RJ Barrett and Scottie Barnes, because they fuel the Toronto offense. And the Cavs know if they make those guys uncomfortable, that it's a good pathway to success. But they want to make Scottie look bad. Point blank, period. Because Evan Mobley is their teammate. And because Scottie Barnes took something from Evan that everybody inside that locker room believes belongs to Evan.
Oh, yeah. Because that locker room, after just Scottie Barnes' name was thrown around, somebody was saying, he's like, what were you talking about? The fake rookie of the year?
Yeah, right.
They understand, like Chris said, Evan Mobley to them, and obviously because he's their teammate, but also because it might just be fact, is an overall better player for the Cavs, especially at today's day and age. And we talked about the stats with Evan guarding Scottie. I want to talk about the stats with Scottie guarding Evan as well, because Evan in 2 games has been guarded by Scottie for 11 minutes. He has 10 points. He's 5 of 8 from the field, 62.5%, and he has 4 assists. The biggest comparison right here is the team points, right? The Cavs have 76 points when Evan Mobley is being guarded by Scottie Barnes. The Toronto Raptors had 41 points when Scottie Barnes is guarded by Evan Mobley. And that's not even talking about today's game, where if you look at the stat sheet, you might say, oh, Evan had less points. He was more efficient. He had a better plus-minus rating. He had more rebounds. He had more, all of these different things that Evan was able to do at a higher level and impact winning to a different way. So, sure, I think Evan Mobley kind of alluded to it in his post-game press conference. He can yell and scream all he wants. I'm going to keep collecting W's. But, Chris, I think that's where I want to end this podcast. Is there anything else that you want to add before we get out of here?
No, not at all. But, I mean, we talked a little bit about this at the very beginning of the season. I don't think the Cavs are losing sleep over the fact that they failed to draft Scottie Barnes, that they took Evan Mobley 1 pick in front of Scottie Barnes. And I would also say that I don't think Toronto is all that upset that they have Scottie as opposed to Evan, because Scottie has been really, really good for them. And I think it's going to be fun to continue to watch the evolution of Scottie Barnes and the evolution of Evan Mobley. And I think it's always going to be fun when the Cavs and the Raptors play each other, because there's definitely more juice because of that particular matchup. And I think it makes it fun. The Cavs are on a completely different level than the Raptors. The Raptors are in early stages of rebuild. They're trying to find who's going to be our core, what kinds of pieces are we going to build around, all those different things. The Cavs have moved past that phase, and now they're competing for championships. So they're not on the same level at all as organizations. But in saying that, these are still kinds of games that you circle because of these two guys that are always going to be linked together for as long as their careers go. And I think it's really, really fun to follow.
With that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. Also, for listeners that want to contribute to a survey about the podcast where you can give your feedback, go to tinyurl.com/WGPod. That's tinyurl.com/WGPod. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast. It's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.